Welcome to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. It's brought to you by the World Puja Network, and we're very grateful for the World Puja Network to be hosting us here. And I'm the director of the Disclosure Project, disclosureproject.org, and CSETI, which is CSETI.org. And I'm joined with Linda Willitts, who has worked with me for many years on these projects, and we're going to have a discussion today about an update on disclosure and what has been going on with recent developments in Europe and with the Vatican and in France and England and other places around the world building for disclosure and what all the consequences of that are. So thank you, Linda, for joining me today.
Sure, it's a pleasure.
Great. So in introducing all this, what I'd like to say is that, in 2001, this is about 7 years ago, we launched the Worldwide Disclosure Project, and we had about 110 initial military and corporate and CIA whistleblowers and witnesses inside the government come forward to talk about what had been kept secret for the last 60 years on the so-called u.f.o subject, or the extraterrestrial matter. And since that time, it has spawned a global disclosure movement that has taken off in countries throughout the world. And it's really become something that, at this point, when we have the majority of the population now know that the UFOs are real, and that some aspect of government's been keeping it secret, although most people don't understand why. And we've recently seen CNN and other networks covering a lot of Disclosure Project witnesses and a lot of information. And one of the things that's been left out that we want to share with the World Puja Network listeners is the reasons behind the secrecy and how it's affecting the world, and how this is connected to the entire global disclosure effort, and why it's so important to connect the reasons behind disclosure and secrecy to the subject. Most people don't understand why this subject's been kept secret, and when you see the things on the network television news, they'll usually only give you a little glimmer of a report, but they won't talk about what's behind the classification, what's behind the secrecy, and why that is a serious issue. So what we want to do is go more in depth, since we have an hour with everyone, to share all of that.
Sounds good.
So I think that the significance of this is that when we first started this effort in 2001, which was actually the culmination of 8 years of assembling witnesses and whistleblowers and documents, there was about 40 or 50% of people thought that some aspect of the UFO matter was real. Now it's almost 80%, and the polls have shown that the information has gotten out there to the point where the vast majority of the public, not just the United States, but throughout the world, believe that these are real and is accepted. What's not happened yet is any U.S. government announcement. But the U.S. government is lagging behind other governments around the world. For example, we have amazing developments in the last 15 months, since the spring of 2007, where the French Space Agency released about 100,000 pages of previously classified documents from their investigations and reports. And, of course, they're in French. But we have someone working on trying to translate some of those and get the best ones to us. Someone I just met with recently in Montreal last week. And so on top of that, the British government has just released this year several thousand new documents on information and investigations that they had classified. And a few weeks ago, the Vatican came out with a statement about the likelihood of intelligent life in the universe, and that they should be viewed as intelligent beings and children of God, just as we all are. And that, of course, was from the Vatican chief astronomer at the Vatican Observatory. So what we're seeing is that in Europe and in other places around the world, there's big a movement afoot for bringing all this information out, letting the world know we're not alone, and moving forward. Unfortunately, the United States is sort of dragging its feet on this, and it's because the United States is the one that's sitting on the majority of the really big energy technology breakthroughs that are being kept secret for what they claim to be national security reasons, but in reality, they're being kept secret because of the fact that once this information is known, we're not going to need oil and gas and coal. One of the things that most people don't think of when they see all the sensational stuff on a Larry King Live show or some other show is that the reason for all the ridicule and the secrecy around the issue is because the intelligence community has worked very closely with the economic powers and financial interests that are very concerned with people knowing that these objects are real, because if they know they're real and they see how they're moving, they're going to know that they're not using a solid rocket booster or jet engine or any kind of propulsion system that we use on the Earth today in the non-classified world. And so when that happens, people are going to say, well, gee, why aren't we running our homes with these kinds of new energy and physics and big breakthroughs in technology? And of course, the public will demand that, because it's very well known that the so-called electromagnetogravitic systems, the anti-gravity systems, and the other zero-point or free energy systems have been studied and kept in classified projects for at least 50 or 60 years, and in the case of some of these energy developments, probably closer to 100 years. And so when the public finds that out, they're going to say, wait a minute, why am I spending $120 to fill up my pickup truck if you're a workman who has a contracting company? Or why am I spending $5,000 or $10,000 a year to heat my home if you're using oil in the East Coast or Northeast or New England, when there are all these alternative systems there? And why are the presidential candidates talking about spending $30 billion to study how to use coal more efficiently when we don't need to be blowing up mountains and dragging coal out of the earth and haven't needed to do so for decades? These are all going to be very, very prominent questions that will be asked by the public and the scientists, and this is why the secrecy has continued, particularly in the United States, that is the world's largest economic power. We're still, even with all our economic problems, 1/3 of the world's economic activity in the United States, and so, or more. And I think that this is, when you look at it, this is really the crux of the secrecy. Of course, you don't hear this sort of analysis when you just see someone get on the television and say, gee, I was with the Air Force and we saw this object and this happened or that happened, because the big news media have sanitized out of their reporting the really meat of the subject. They want to keep it very superficial and very light, but they don't want to let it go into any deeper discussion.
Well, you know, that's exactly what caused me to join CSETI when I first heard you speak in 1996, because up until then, I had only heard, you know, people's experiences seeing UFOs reiterated, and, you know, and that was the extent, you know, to which anyone delved into the subject until you started talking about these issues. And even now, I mean, that the secrecy, do you think that the secrecy is on shaky ground these days? Because even very recently on talk radio, I've heard people say that if GM and other auto companies that are actually closing plants and losing huge amounts of money right now if they really believed there were alternative energies, wouldn't they bring those forward now, because it's their very survival that's at stake?
They would if they were free to do so. You know, one of the interesting and disturbing accounts is this very wealthy billionaire that I know, and he had known the head of General Motors back in the 60s, I believe it was the late 60s, who confessed to him that they had within their classified operations at General Motors these sort of free energy systems, and that they could make every single car coming out of Detroit and out off the GM assembly lines using zero gas, zero gasoline and oil. And that he felt that this executive with General Motors felt that it was time for that to happen. Well, it turns out 2 weeks later this man was found dead of an apparent suicide, except this man that I know, who's a very prominent industrialist and extremely wealthy, told me that he knew that he had not been at all suicidal, and they were friends, and that, in fact, he was convinced that he had been silenced because he was pushing for this to come out. So, unfortunately, often, even within these large corporations, a lot of the people in these corporations don't even know the reality of the classified projects that are compartmentalized and held secret within them. I, for example, met with the head of Lockheed International some years ago at his home near San Diego, and he had recently retired as the head of the Lockheed International branch. But he had not been privy to what they were doing at Lockheed Skunk Works and had no information on this issue. In fact, I was the source of the information for this. And similarly, when I met with the former chairman of Stanford Research Institute, SRI, Stanford Research International, he told me that he knew that DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration, and other operations had contracting going on within SRI dealing with these issues. But he, even though he was the chairman of SRI, he was only an administrator, and that these were highly compartmentalized projects. And he was asking me to tell him what I had found out about what was going on inside his shop, inside his organization, when he had been chairman of SRI. So people don't understand the way this system is set up, and the system is set up to be highly compartmentalized. And so even with a lot of these, you would think, well, gee, wouldn't this be a great thing for the automakers and Ford and all these folks who are really in trouble? Well, it would be if, A, the people who were doing the conventional retail part of their operation knew about these things, which they don't, and B, if they did know about it, if they'd be allowed to bring it out. And the fact is, in the past, they haven't been allowed to because they've tried. This is like this senior executive with GM in the 60s who wanted to do this back 40 years ago. So we're in a situation where the problem is not scientific, it's more strategic and political and leadership. And this is why so much of what the Disclosure Project has tried to do is put together the perspective so that people understand that we need new, bold leadership to bring not just the information that we're not alone in the universe and that we've been visited. I think, as I said, nearly 80% of the public accept that, but that behind that story, sort of the narrative that's not been discussed, which is so important for people to understand, is that the reason for the high classification and the extreme secrecy around it is because they do not want people to know that we don't need a centralized petrodollar-based economy any longer, and we do not need centralized utilities or oil or gas or coal. And that, of course, is a multi-trillion-dollar part of the world economy that's being protected by the secrecy. And so that's what's really driving this whole issue. And it's interesting for me to see a number of the big news organizations bringing Disclosure Project witnesses out to the national media through CNN and other avenues, but not allowing anyone to speak about the reason for the secrecy or the analysis behind it. That's all being still kept very much off the topic. And I think that this is why the alternative media and the Internet and shows like the World Puja Network are so important, so that people can have a source of getting information that they're simply not going to get on CNN.
Well, and it's just amazing, really, that nothing has changed. I remember working on the Disclosure Project, and in May of 2001, one of the witnesses and I went to the Library of Congress, and we looked up the hearings that had been held in Congress, in our National Congress in 1968, and the transcripts were there, and they were just the same as any UFO conference you'd go to today. I mean, it was just reiterating once again people's experiences, I saw a cigar-shaped craft in a field or whatever, and that's all they've talked about for 40 years, and really, you're really shaking things up here that other things are being delved into now.
Yes, it's interesting, too, because in one of the documents I've seen from those 1968 era hearings was a guy named Donald Rumsfeld and another fellow named John Warner, who's now the retiring senior senator from Virginia, were instrumental in massaging the direction of those hearings in 1968 so that they would be superficial, non-conclusive, and of no significance. And this is what happens. I mean, this is exactly the kind of hijacking of a government and big media that occurs, and this is why it's so important to have people who are willing to not only speak the truth, but air the truth and disseminate the truth. And at disclosureproject.org, anyone can go to disclosureproject.org and see this. And we have a 2-hour DVD of these military and government witnesses speaking, and on that DVD is a over 500-page executive summary that has the documents and a lot of this perspective and information and analysis in it that's actually in the same DVD that people can get. And I encourage people to get it and look at it and share it with other people and have viewings at their home and spread the word, because that executive document that's in there is a modified version of what we had given President Clinton and his CIA director and national security team in the 90s, sort of an updated version. So I think that that's what people need to know, is that we have put all that together, and that we want to now move. We want to move from not only the success of disclosure and the fact that there's this worldwide juggernaut of a disclosure movement going on globally, and that many governments, a lot of the governments around the world, want this issue out there, including most of the European Union, the Vatican, and many other governments, but that we have to keep moving forward with the next step of this, which is, of course, what we're doing with the OrionProject.org, which is to, having spent 18 years on this issue, we've identified the most brilliant scientists in the world who understand the physics and the science behind this, that we want to put into initially a small research campus here near the University of Virginia, and have these energy systems built under our careful guidance and watch, and bring out the first generation of these energy-generating devices that would run your home with no energy costs and would be extracting energy from what's called the zero-point energy field, which is the baseline energy field that's in the space all around us that you can extract electromagnetic energy from. And a huge amount of electricity can be derived this way from these sort of systems, and that's the next step. And we're continuing also to make peaceful contact with these visitors, because really disclosure grew out of the initial CSETI effort to engage in close encounters of the fifth kind, or CE5s. And CE5s are when humans decide to voluntarily interact with these visitors. And we have developed a whole training program that you can see at CSETI.org about how to become an ambassador from Earth to these visitors, so that we can have a face turned towards space and towards these extraterrestrial civilizations that's peaceful and enlightened and conscious, and that understands this issue very deeply, and will contact these visitors for the purpose of peaceful interaction and peaceful open dialogue. This has not happened in the history of the world within the organized governments of the world yet, but I will say that there's a major G7 country that is discussing doing exactly this with us. And I can't be more specific because I've been asked not to be, and that's just a matter of discretion at this stage, diplomatic discretion. But it's a very sensitive undertaking. But we are now at the point where, having successfully made contact through CSETI, and where we have had literally thousands of people who have been with us, who have seen the success of the CSETI protocols to make contact, where we have had ET objects and beings come very close to our group, including, we just got back from Colorado, Crestone, Colorado, where we had on a nightly basis amazing contact and sighting experiences that we'll talk about next time. And I think that what is happening is that as that has gone forward, and as disclosure has now convinced the majority of the world's governments that the subject is real, they're now looking at, well, now that we know that this is real and we're going to release what we know about it, what do we do about it? And they're seeing that the CSETI model of close encounters of the fifth kind, where people organize themselves with the correct protocols to make contact, that those work. And in the fact that they work, these extraterrestrial visitors from different star systems will actually come and interact with a team of people in ways that are dispositive, that are absolutely unmistakable. And in fact, we have had this government that we're dealing with, their Ministry of Defense and their head of state are all briefed on what we're doing. And they have actually sent people to be with us in the last year on expeditions to see what happens, and they are just amazed at the potential we have. And this is with no funding and no real high-tech equipment on site and no secure facility and airspace. It's not like we're a sovereign government that can secure the airspace around our contact site, but we have still had amazing things happen. And so what I'm telling people here in this interview is that everyone needs to get on board this concept of moving from knowing about the issue to actually doing something about it. And the thing that everyone can do, actually, is learn to be an ambassador from Earth to these visitors. And by becoming an ambassador from Earth to these visitors, they then potentiate in the field of consciousness, as Sheldrake talks about, the morphogenic field, the field of the awake universe around us. It potentiates larger scale and more open contact that's peaceful between humanity and these visitors. And this is what's been lacking since 1954 when near Edwards Air Force Base, former President Eisenhower actually met with extraterrestrials in a landing event, that we have had a foreign government send us a document from a first-hand account of a witness who was there describing what happened. And Eisenhower's instincts were to disclose this information to the public, but he was convinced not to do so by what he later called in his farewell address to the world when he left office in January of 1961, what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, and which I've now expanded to be the military-industrial financial corporate university laboratory complex. It's this whole big conglomeration. But Eisenhower's instincts, according to these first-hand accounts, were that he did want the public to know this, and he did want open, peaceful contact. And unfortunately, he got convinced, I think through scare tactics, not to do so. And we see this happening now. There are reports that there have been recent meetings at the United Nations where people have made inquiries and had discussions about this issue, where some U.S. military people have come in and warned these other nations about how disruptive to the world economy and emerging democracies disclosing this information would be, putting a negative and fearful spin on it, sort of like the way that 9/11 was capitalized to stampede our nation into this misadventure in Iraq. And I think that this is the kind of psychological warfare that goes on in the intelligence community and counterintelligence community that ends up tricking a lot of our leaders, including, unfortunately, President Eisenhower and all the presidents since him that have known about this. So I think that what the public has to realize is that since there's currently no open, peaceful, diplomatic effort from any government of the world or the United Nations making contact, it's up to us to do it. It's up to us to do it as a citizens' diplomacy effort, and that's what we're doing. If you go to CSETI.org, CSETI.org, you'll see what we're doing. There's an entire training kit and manual for learning how to do that where you live, where you can gather together with 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 of your like-minded colleagues and begin to practice these protocols that involve lasers and electromagnetic signals that we send out into space, as well as consciousness and thought, where we enter into remote viewing and contact with these visitors through the nature of unbounded awareness that's within us. And what we have found is that by using these protocols together in a group format within the paradigm of universal peace, of peaceful contact, that once the group reaches a certain resonance and a certain harmony and a certain intent, these visitors appear in all kinds of wonderful and mysterious ways. And they are very interested in making contact with humans who are willing to put themselves out there for this purpose, because they've been waiting for half a century, since the 50s, for people on the planet to respond to them in a way that's peaceful and intelligent. And I think that this is a really big challenge to people. They have to realize that if we do this, and it's sort of like if the leaders, if the people will lead, the leaders will follow. So the people need to lead in this regard, and that we're actually being watched by some of the world leaders. The CSETI CE5 initiative and our team that we go out, like we just came back from Colorado, we're going to be at Mount Shasta in California in late August and early September, and the information is at cseti.org for those of you who want to come. I think there may still be room, I'm not sure. And then again, we're going to be up in the high desert of California in Joshua Tree National Park in November, and here in Virginia in October at our farm here in Virginia, where we'll be training 30 or 40 people to enter into the state of being an ambassador to these visitors. And this is an exciting program, because what it is, it's the follow-through, like the OrionProject.org is the follow-through on the technology and energy and environmental front. The CSETI Contact Program, which was the original program, it actually preceded Disclosure Project, is the carrying forward of the information and modeling what the next step is. And we're modeling for the governments of the world and also the public. And also, more importantly, in deep consciousness, this morphogenic field of consciousness that manifests the world around us. We're modeling what the next step should be by actually doing it, not just thinking about it. And when, 30 or 40 or 50 people sit together under the stars in that state of awareness, in this state of peaceful samadhi and cosmic consciousness. And by the way, we usually do a puja at the beginning of the week to teach people meditation and to teach people how to enter into higher states of consciousness. It creates this big change in the world. You can feel it. And now we're seeing it manifest by us being approached. We didn't approach this government, by the way, I'm referring to this major G7 country whose government is now reaching out to us to make contact openly for their head of state and their government and their scientific leaders. But it's because that has been not only successfully done by our team, and they know that, and that we have made contact, and we have had near landings and sightings and contact with the visitors, but I think that it's also the information and the consciousness behind what we've done has potentiated this change away from denial and secrecy or even hostility in the case of some secret programs that have actually targeted and fired on these ET craft. It's moved that dialogue into this open contact model, which is what CSETI started in 1990, 18 years ago. So we're saying that this is what everyone needs to continue to do, because if the people continue to do this, they will not only have contact themselves, but it will alter, sort of like the 100th monkey phenomenon, it'll alter the dynamic in the world so that the entire world can evolve into the future as a global peaceful civilization, making contact and going into space peacefully with these other visitors.
And it's just incredible how the ETs respond to us and the things that they do, to acknowledge us and to interact with us. And it never ends, the things they think of to do. It's always amazing.
About a few of the recent things that have happened. I mean, I think it'd be great for you to mention a couple of them.
Well, one of the very coolest things that happened in Crestone that just blew everybody away was the Big Dipper is really prominent in the sky, and it's a clear sky and a dark sky, so the Big Dipper is just obvious and prominent. And when we were communicating with the ETs, they were making there's 7 main stars in the Big Dipper, and they were making them disappear one by one. Like we go, well, the corner of the bucket of the Dipper is missing, the corner star, and I looked at it with binoculars, and there were smaller stars in the background that were visible, but the big one wasn't. Now, you looked at it with night vision, which, is even better than regular binoculars because any light at all would show up there, and you didn't even see the big star.
Well, what was fascinating about this is a few minutes before this happened, there was a beautiful golden ET craft that came in over the Great Sand Dunes. We were up at Blanca Peak, and it moved in and then went into a cloud, stayed there for about 10 minutes or 15 minutes, and then came back out and came over towards the Big Dipper, and then went into another cloud. And then we didn't see it again, and then the sky became completely clear, crystal clear.
Right, that's right.
And as that happened, we then could see the whole Big Dipper and all the star field around it. Well, as this happened, it turns out that a member of our team had the thought, wouldn't it be great after this other sighting of this craft that came very close and flew in? It was very much in the atmosphere. It wasn't out in space, and it was sort of a golden amber color, silent. Everyone who saw that, were pretty amazed. What happened is that he had the thought, well, wouldn't it be amazing if the extraterrestrial visitors could make stars of the Big Dipper disappear or rearrange? And he had that as a thought. Now, the reason that's important is that we know that the extraterrestrial interstellar civilizations have electromagnetic systems for communication that interface with directed thought, particularly when you're in a higher state of consciousness that's coherent. We know this. This is a core part of what we're teaching on these trainings, is how to go into this samadhi state, then how to remotely view the ET craft, and then how to use a coherent thought and imaging to show them where we are and invite them to interact with us. And it's a very, very effective technology because the ETs have technologies that are interfacing with coherent thought, just like a light that's coherent is a laser. Thought that's in that state is very powerful, and it's like a laser thought, if you want to look at it that way. Well, he had that thought while we were in that meditative circle, and then this happened. Now, we didn't find that out till later that evening because he was so amazed. He didn't say anything while we were out under the stars with 40 people. I think he was a bit shy. And it turned out that I had a night scope that magnifies the light 32,000 times, which means when you're looking through it, you see stars through this binocular system that you can't even imagine are out there. It is so amazing. And when the ETs moved some kind of object very specifically in front of each of these stars that went on and off in the Big Dipper, and when I would look at them, I would see that the little tiny stars that were in that same area of the sky you could see very clearly through the night scope, but the big bright star that makes up part of one of the 7 stars of the Big Dipper, or at one time there were 2 of them that did this, would be vanished, invisible. Well, this is like bizarre, but it was just a unusual and very amazing way, and it was in a certain pattern. We're still trying to figure out what the signaling sequence was because we think it had some kind of significance in terms of some sort of a code. And of course, as I mentioned, this was preceded by this sighting of this beautiful golden amber circular ship that came in and came into the clouds that were not very high above us. So I think that when you have 41 people sitting in a circle seeing something like this, and I know this sounds really strange because most people think, oh, well, they're going to land and you're going to kick the tires. But many times the ETs will do things that are simply strange. They're just not necessarily what people expect from looking at science fiction movies, because you're dealing with intelligences that are extremely evolved and are working often on extremely abstract and spiritual levels. And so we saw this going on. I don't know how long this happened with the Big Dipper. It must have lasted for 10 or 15 minutes.
Oh, at least, and it was interactive with us, too.
And it was interactive. I would take my laser and signal, and then they would signal on and off, turning the star on and off, signaling with my laser.
And I remember at one point, all the lights of the Dipper came back on again, all the stars came back on, and we said, oh, look, the whole Dipper's back again, and suddenly one went out.
Right. So it was very interactive, and it went on for like 20 minutes with 41 people watching this. And, you just can't make this stuff up. This is just like amazing. And this is just like 1 half-hour interval where an entire week of being out under the stars involved these sort of sightings and these sort of interactions and objects on the ground and electromagnetic tones that come through the circle and all kinds of things. And so I tell people that the extraterrestrial civilizations that are observing what we're doing are extremely excited that there are humans who have decided to do this and have decided to join together and work together to be in a state of peaceful contact for the greater good, and not just out of curiosity and not just out of wanting to have the ETs do something that's spectacular, although they often do. It's because the intent of what we're doing is that we are manifesting together with them in consciousness the good future of universal peace, where humanity will begin to live peacefully on this planet with these advanced sciences and technologies and advanced consciousness, and we'll be then ready to go into space and become interstellar ourselves. And this is the future of the human race. And we are going to make that big leap in this whole new cycle of our evolution that has begun. I think we're in a new 500,000-year cycle. I talk about this in my book, Hidden Truths, Forbidden Knowledge, which is at disclosureproject.org, where I think we've entered into this new cycle, and that the hallmark of it is universal peace and the evolution of a continuous peaceful civilization on Earth that's using these very advanced technologies and sciences to live on the Earth in a material way, in a way that is peaceful with the Earth and doesn't harm Gaia, but more importantly, in a state of consciousness where we don't view anything in a violent and militaristic way, but as part of the expression of the cosmos that's peaceful, and interact with them on that level of consciousness. And I think that's what's really important about this, is that we're actually doing this. We're not just thinking about it, but we're organizing teams of people, and that anyone listening to this interview can learn how to do this. They can either come on one of these expeditions with us. They're open to the public. Or they can go and get the information from disclosureproject.org or CSETI.org and learn how to make contact themselves, set up a group of people in your own local area, and set up your own contact team. And you'll be amazed. People have done this and have had just astonishing experiences in contact, and it's all been very beautiful and very peaceful. And so that's what's really exciting, is that from Disclosure and from the early days of CSETI in the 90s, we now have thousands of people around the world. I mean, on this last expedition to Colorado, we had people from Australia, from Malaysia, from Canada, from all over the United States. We've had people come from Russia. We've had people come from Europe and all over, and even from Africa. So it's really exciting because this information is spreading around the world, and people are learning that they can become citizen ambassadors to these people who are visiting us from other planetary systems, and that we don't have to wait for the governments. In fact, if we wait for the governments to do it, it won't happen. That if we do it, it potentiates and leads the way for these governments of the world to do it in a way that's peaceful. Because right now, the only response that any governments are engaged in are these very classified and secret military operations that end up tracking and even targeting, shooting at these ET craft, and on a few occasions, unfortunately, have hit them and destroyed them. And this is why it's very important that humans who are more enlightened and more progressive thinking organize themselves into contact teams in their local area, no matter where you live, and say, look, it's time for us to make contact peacefully, because in doing so, we're showing the face of humanity that's the good side of us, the side of humanity that is enlightened and peaceful and forward-looking and nonviolent. And this is really key, because right now there's either denial about the issue or there's been this military response. or there's been passivity, what we were talking about earlier, where you'll have people who just report something they saw. But that's not enough. We need to go from understanding they're here to doing something about it that's constructive. And so that's what the CSETI.org protocols are, is to do something constructive in real time where we actually go out there and make contact and train people to know how to do it. And then also, what do they do? What do you do when a craft shows up? What do you do if something's right on the ground around you? How do you respond to it? How do you interact? What is the communication that you should engage in? All of these questions are things that we train and to go into very deeply for these week trainings. And we encourage people to look into joining us here in Virginia in October, and also at Joshua Tree in Palm Springs in California in November, and if possible at Mount Shasta in California in late August and September. I'm not sure if there's still much room in that particular expedition. I think may be already pretty much booked.
Yeah,
but that's the sort of thing that everyone can learn to do, whether or not they can come with us for a week out under the stars, although it's a magical experience to do so. And the people who are being drawn to the project, I know the ones we had in Colorado were just a wonderful group of people and very, very beautiful souls and very enlightened and extremely ready to make contact. And that's why every single night that we went out under the stars, we had sightings, we had contact, we had all kinds of extraterrestrial energy around us and amazing things that we'll talk about more next time.
And it's just incredible to go on one of these week-long expeditions, and I just love it. But it isn't necessary if you can't get away for a week, because on the CSETI.org website, we have training kits available that instruct you, and there's CDs and printed material, and they instruct you on how to go through these protocols. And I remember being in England, when we were in England in 2000, when we went to the Barge Inn, which is the crop circle pub that everyone goes to hang out at, and you are recognized there. And I remember this little couple from Wales ran up to you with such excitement because they had ordered one of the training kits from CSETI, and they were just so excited to tell you about the contact experiences they had had in their backyard using the protocols.
That's right, and this is happening all over the world. And as it happens, it's setting up this morphogenic field and a sort of a fractal that's developing and growing around the world of awareness that is now affecting people at the United Nations and in major governments in Europe who are saying, why don't we do this? Why don't we go out and secure an area and have our leaders make contact with these visitors so that they have some kind of intelligent, peaceful interaction with humanity, and that it's high time that this happened. And in fact, I had a senior Ministry of Defense official from one of these governments say to me that we needed to do this to correct the mistake that was made 54 years ago this month in July, when Eisenhower made contact, and they did have a landing and a meeting, but then the whole operation got hijacked by people who were militarist and violent and were not wanting the truth to be known to the public. So, in fact, this gentleman who's extremely high-ranking said to me that this is an opportunity to correct that mistake and set the world back on the right path. And so that's what we're talking about. This is a very significant event that's happening. And by people doing this, like this couple in Wales that you mentioned, Linda, it's actually setting up within the fabric of consciousness, because the awake mind that we all have within us, at a deep level, there's only one conscious being shining through all things. And if you really understand that and experience it, and you act from that level, which is what we do in these, and in fact, we have a new meditation CD that is an instruction CD in how to get into that state of samadhi, and then how to utilize that understanding to make contact. I think that once you understand that, then you can see why it has such a powerful effect, even if you are just a few people in Poughkeepsie, New York, or in Bakersfield, California, or in Australia, or in Malaysia, or wherever you are, that when you're doing this time and space is obliterated, and suddenly you're in this field of consciousness doing this work, potentiating this huge change on Earth, and it has an effect at the highest levels of leadership on this planet and to every man, woman, and child on the planet. And more importantly, it is modeling and setting up the momentum and the pattern of thinking and behaving and consciousness for the coming several thousand years of human evolution, where we're going to have to live on this planet not only using peaceful energy technologies and abundance that is just for everyone, but also with the consciousness that goes with it that is based in universal peace. You know, we simply can't trade the kind of conflicts we have on this planet now and establish world peace only to have the disinformation folks convince everyone that there's something to be afraid of out in space that we need to unite against and fight. And by the way, that's the subtext of 99% of everything dealing with UFOs is that, oh, they're scary, oh, they're here hurting us, oh, they're invading us, there's this, there's that. It's all false information based in fear, because fear is the mind killer and the spirit killer, and people buy into it. I'm always amazed at people in the New Thought and New Age community who buy into all that superstition and fear around the ET issue, and it's because they have been brainwashed also into the paradigm of fear. And so the only way to get beyond fear, and I think it's very interesting because when Krishna was speaking to Arjuna on the battlefield in the Bhagavad Gita, he says, a little of this eliminates all fear. And the this he's referring to is this state of pure consciousness and unbounded awareness that's within every single person and within each of our soul. And that's what you have to reach into to see the truth, know the truth, and then act in a way that creates this very good, universally peace future. And the future is only going to be peaceful, or it can't exist, because we're dealing with now a level of knowledge and science and technology that doesn't allow for the consciousness of division and hatred and warfare. You cannot survive into the future with these advanced technologies within the consciousness of warfare. So universal peace is not just a philosophical level. It's an actual existential requirement. It in order for us to exist in the future at all, it's going to require the consciousness of universal peace.
And you know, that is one, I don't know if everyone quite understands, that is one of the main things that we do every night in meditation on a CSETI training, is we work on potentiating that change on Earth. And some of the really most amazing ET responses we've gotten is when you invite them during a meditation to join us in the healing of the planet.
Well, yes, you know, in fact, this year, after when we were doing that one evening, we were engaged in this universal sort of meditation and prayer where we invited these visitors from other star systems as well as in the angelic realm and the celestial realm to join with us in this meditation and prayer for the healing of the earth. And we also then go to all these power centers and people who have information about these things to see the sort of light of forgiveness and the light of knowledge and guidance going to all of them. Because we do this without any sort of negativity towards anyone involved with that. We just view it as a matter of education and enlightenment and knowledge. And as we get into that state together and in this state of light together, that's when we have had the most amazing ET contact, like right above us or right around us. And in this particular week, about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, when we were in Colorado, we actually had this massive triangular craft that had come at Mount Shasta. And it was about the size of the triangle in Pegasus. If you go out to the night sky and look at that big triangle in Pegasus, it was this big, huge triangle of 3 points of light. It was moving across out in space, and it manifested right over us as we had completed this meditation and prayer for the earth. And this is exactly what happened at Mount Shasta back a few years ago, where 3 of the 5 nights we were out on the wilderness, out in the wilderness at Mount Shasta, where we're going to be in about a month from now, a month and a half. we had this same massive craft, and it was so large that it was seen from Vancouver all the way to L.A. That's how big this object was, and was reported and called in to various authorities. And it is the big interstellar center that occasionally makes a showing when everyone reaches this point of resonance, and it's their way of affirming to us that this is exactly the consciousness that will be guiding the future of humanity.
And it's so far out of our atmosphere, so far out in space, that our military doesn't even send jets up to try to do anything to contain that.
No, they can't. It's beyond the reach.
Yeah,
that one is way beyond the reach, because it's several hundred to several thousand miles across on each side of the triangle. It's enormous. And when you see it, people are just gasping. I mean, it's just this amazing event.
It's just majestic how it moves across the sky.
Yeah, it's very majestic. And, again, of course, this just happened a couple weeks ago, and in Colorado over the July 4th week, actually, when we were there in Creston, Colorado. So, to have 40 people see this after we've made contact and invited things like this to appear around us it's something that is so affirming. And then, of course, people then understand that this isn't just a pipe dream. This is something that anyone can do once they understand the principles and understand the meditation techniques and understand the protocols. And the idea is that when people leave these expeditions, they're now ambassadors to the universe, citizens ambassadors, but they're ambassadors to the universe from Earth that go back to their local area and train other people to do it. And that's what's happening. So it's this entire program that is going along with Disclosure. And people ask me, they say, well, when is Disclosure going to happen? And I go, it happened already. I just gave a talk in Denver, Colorado about a week ago, I guess now, or a couple weeks. And we didn't even advertise it really publicly. And there were like 600 people that came, and we had to turn away probably another 500. I mean, it was in this hall at the Tivoli there, and people are so excited about this. But one person had asked me, well, when is Disclosure going to happen? I said, it's already happened. We did it. It's already out there. You have 80% of the public who already know that this is true. And so you have the major governments of Europe releasing this information. So everyone's asking, for some kind of official in Washington to stand up at a press conference. I said, no, that's our job. We've done it already. Whatever they do will just be a secondary level of disclosure. The primary has happened already by the ETs who've shown themselves all over the world, and by the Disclosure Project.org that has had over 1 billion people see the information we put out there. So now the next phase of it is organizing everyone who understands these principles and who are in a state of higher awareness and consciousness to become these ambassadors. And as that happens, it will then drive the momentum to have the more enlightened government leaders in the world get together to make open contact officially. And that's what's actually being negotiated and discussed right now with a major G7 country. So this is really exciting, these developments, and this is why we ask people to keep what we're doing in their prayer and for meditation and for protection and guidance, and to keep this momentum moving. And also the next big event that has to happen, this is the third leg of this, there's the contact through CSETI, there's the education of the public about the deep information in disclosureproject.org, and the third one is the orionproject.org, where we're assembling the best people in the world who understand the sciences behind these energy systems and propulsion systems, so that we can actually establish physically a sustainable and just civilization on this planet that doesn't have to be fighting over the last barrel of oil, which is where we're headed if we stay on the path we're on now. It's very interesting that even T. Boone Pickens has been doing all these ads on CNN and other networks saying that he's putting $10 billion into wind farms throughout Texas and the Midwest, because he says we can't drill our way out of this crisis we're in. And I would say yes, and if we would take it one step further, we could do the work in these really advanced electromagnetic sciences and the electromagnetogravitic systems, so that we wouldn't even need wind and solar, that we would have these really advanced systems that would run every home and every car and every factory with zero pollution and zero energy cost, I might add, once you have the actual electromagnetic generator, or resonator is really more what it is, in place. And this is what we need to develop. We know that they've been developed in classified projects, and we also know that a number of people, probably dating back to the time of Nikola Tesla and Stubblefield back in 1908, developed early prototypes of these that ended up being either confiscated or suppressed. And so we know that the reasons for the secrecy on these new energy issues that have kept the world enslaved to the fossil fuel system and the centralized economic system is the same secrecy behind the UFO issue. And I think that it's two sides of one coin, and this is what most people don't get. It's all part of one large systemic problem. And I think that that's why disclosure is so important, but we have to move now not only from disclosure to making open, peaceful contact, but also putting together and supporting the R&D for these inventors who can put these sciences into at least an operating system that is your entry level. At least. We may not be building a, quote, flying saucer right away, but we can certainly get these guys to come together and build an electromagnetic generator that extracts the energy from this zero-point energy field that all of matter and space-time is fluxing in and out of. And when you have that, then it's the beginning of a whole new civilization where every village in Africa and every home in America and every factory in China that is destroying the environment so heavily can have these sorts of energy systems. And there has got to be the R&D and then the leadership and strategic and security team put around that so that the whole world knows about it as soon as we have it proven. And that's what we're asking people to support at the OrionProject.org. So all three of these projects, it makes the CSETI triangle, as we say. Our logo are three circles connected into an equilateral triangle. Because that was based on a meditation we sent out to the ETs, and they created a crop circle in 1992 that looked exactly like that in Wiltshire and Alton Barnes. I tell people that this is precisely what we're doing. It has three key components. And it's interesting that the mantra that we're now sharing on the meditation CD is also a three-note that has the shape of a triangle in its tonality when you actually hear it. And so there's this motif going on with three. and I have to say that there was a sequence with the Big Dipper we were talking about that also had that involved with it. And when many of us got back that night to our homes, we found that that there had been a power interruption in the area, but instead of the clocks going back to 12:00 like they do when they're going to reset and the power's gone off, they were flashing 3:03.
That's right.
Several people.
Yeah.
And it's like, what is that about? So there's some, it's interesting how mysterious and in many ways abstract, but there's always a message, a deeper message in this. And I'm telling people this is part of what the message is. There's a three-pronged effort that we're engaged in. One is the DisclosureProject.org, the other, CSETI.org, where we train people to make open contact as diplomats, and the third is the OrionProject.org, where anyone can go and contribute whatever they feel like they can. So we get this fund put together so we can have a research campus here with these scientists that we've identified to build these energy systems, get them in a very strong and robust and stable form, and out to the public so that their homes and cars are being run on these new energy systems. So those are the three big projects, and they're all interconnected very, very much.
And it's just amazing how everything just grew. And you're right, the motif of three. Everything grew into this motif of three, and those of us that have been to even one CSETI training or many CSETI trainings, when we go home, we establish groups in our own communities and go out and do that on a much smaller scale. And we always have some interaction with the ETs. They respond to you. Once they know you, they respond to you in smaller groups as well. And this also, one of the things we do is work on the consciousness aspect and the meditation of the healing of the earth. And so this, once again, it potentiates this morphogenic field throughout the whole world. So CSETI and all these other projects really have grown throughout the world, and it is totally creating a morphogenic field that's helping to make a change.
That's how change happens, and it happens from the grassroots up through people understanding and then actually walking the path of change in their own lives and together as groups. Well, I think our hour is up, and I would like to thank you, Linda, for joining me with these discussions, and I'd like to thank you all for listening to Conversations with Dr. Stephen Greer. It's brought to you by the World Puja Network, and we very much thank them for allowing us this hour to speak with you. And this is Dr. Stephen Greer of disclosureproject.org and CSETI.org and the orionproject.org, and I hope we will see some of you soon at one of our expeditions out under the stars, and I'll be joined on my next conversation with Dr. Ted Loder to talk more about these energy and propulsion systems and what we're doing to bring them out to the world. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.